Live everywhere.
Daily Co's Radio on netrootsradio.com presents
David Waldman. Kagro in the Morning Show. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Thursday, June 4th, 2020. On to another day of coronavirus response, lockdown, isolation, quarantine, / reopening the economy, / another 1.9 million reported new unemployment claims. I noticed that The Hill was reporting that and tweeting it out this morning as that new unemployment claims had fallen to 1.9 million. Well, it is a fall from where it was before, of course, but, like we were talking about yesterday, only in Washington would this be considered a cut. Well, only in Washington, I guess, would this really be considered a fall in unemployment claims. It is one. We understand why it is. So much to wrap up today. I don't even know how we're going to get to it all. Greg Dworkin has to be in and out the door quickly, I understand, this morning, as they're going to use up all the electricity in Connecticut and not have any left, or something like that. We have to finish this up before the last drop of electricity is used. So we'll get prepared for that. Daily Co's Radio is live now, and I'll tell you what Bill says all the way up in Portland, Maine. Today, Kagro X uses flashbangs, that sounds like fun, to clear a path from his front yard to the neighbor's tool shed, where he'll hold up the instruction manual to a Toro riding lawnmower. Is that your manual, sir? It's a manual. That's exactly how I'll have to... A manual. Oh, that really actually works out pretty well. Okay. Well, I'll say we're ready to roll today, except we're not really. But, this is the way it goes. We'll catch up with Greg. The big development in the day, I think, Donald Trump finally building his barrier wall. It turns out that he can get fencing and walls built overnight when he wants to. And it turns out that the place he wanted to do it was around the White House. They've expanded the security perimeter a couple of blocks around the White House for some reason. Here comes Greg's call, but my Skype isn't picking it up on my computer. Once again, I'm not really certain why that is. Hang on, Greg. I will call you, I think. Perhaps we'll have to do it that way. That's an odd thing to have happen. Is there some extra button that I should be pushing? This is the second time here. I know, missed call, right? All right, well, I'll call you, Greg, because I know you got to get in and out. Let's see. How will I do that? Here we are. We'll try calling you and go backwards this time. I don't really know why this happened. No, Greg may not know that it's me trying to call him. That's another thing. All right, well, I'll stop the music, I guess, if that's not going to work. Okay, now I've missed his call, or he's missed mine. So we're even. All right, let me see. Now he just typed me a message. Would you like to know what he typed for me? You call me. To which I said, I'll call you. And then, it didn't work out all that well the first time I did it, but we'll try it one more time. I'm sure we'll be ready this time.
Hey, good morning.
Hi, good morning, Greg. We got to get to you right away. I understand you're building a new security fence.
No, you go first.
Oh, okay, that's fine. I'm putting in a generator, you're putting in a security fence, or vice versa.
The question is Mexico paying for either one of these things?
Yes, absolutely. Just like he promised. He's a man of his word.
Yeah, because he always keeps his promises,
Never
and that's
lies.
important.
Like
so
Haley,
I think we need to look at the big picture before we get into the weeds. We love getting into the weeds.
Yeah, and it's legal in some cases.
Yeah, I have to bring up this thing from a few years ago from McSweeney's when they wrote about the New York Times. In order to keep our editorial page completely balanced, we're hiring more dipshits.
All right.
Right, and that was February 2018. I guess maybe that was the Bret Stephens era. I'm not sure.
Hey, maybe,
But that was pretty good. And this comes from the New York Times allowing Tom Cotton to put a fascist screed up about using the military to basically shoot people.
What fun. Well, that's what they're for.
That's not an exaggeration. The New York Times staff is upset about it. I'd probably come on the side of, if he wants to publish, let him publish. It's terrible, but let everybody see it. But as Eldad O'Brien points out, you got to be fair about it. First of all, they didn't allow any comments, which is ridiculous.
Oh.
And secondly, and thirdly, and fourthly, Soldat says, looking forward to the New York Times provocative op-ed about child pornography actually being a good thing because David Brooks likes ideas and thinking.
Right.
Looking forward to the New York Times provocative op-ed on justice. Why do we bother with trials anyway? They take up time, and judges and juries should be doing other things. Maybe just shoot people. Save everybody time.
That's true. It's quick. I don't know how expensive.
Looking forward to the New York Times provocative op-ed about why black Americans should be enslaved again because ideas, thinking.
I'm just saying.
David Brooks said, I believe in democracy. I believe in a free press. I believe in open debate. I love it when my newspaper prints pieces I disagree with. It causes me to think. And my only response to that, to David Brooks, is show your work.
I guess.
Show us that you actually think.
Yeah, I have not seen the receipts for that. That is pretty remarkable. But I am proud of the New York Times for stepping up and giving a voiceless United States senator the chance to be heard. It's only he can talk for as long as he wants with literally no interruptions, and no one can stop him without 60 votes. But okay.
Right. Now, here's a big picture thing I also want to mention. This comes from the Democracy Fund Voter Study Group, and it was published in October 2019. A more decisive electorate may be making early polls better. And this comes from some of the work that we've cited on the show, G. Elliott Morris, Alexander Agajanian. With the average track record for early polls is unimpressive. Analysis of recent election cycles tells a slightly different story. In their analysis of polls since the 1980 presidential election, Morris and Agajanian found that early polling has been notably better at predicting final election results in recent elections. For example, they report that polls fielded 300 days, that's 9 months, before the 2016 presidential election were off in the final result by about 4 points. In fact, if we look at the accuracy of polls conducted over the course of the 2016 election, early polling was only marginally worse than polls conducted during the final stretch, and early polls in 2012 performed similarly well. So the slew of polls yesterday showing Biden clobbering Trump are important and should not be dismissed just because we're 5 months out.
All right.
Don't even yell at me that we're 6 months out. We're not even 6 months out. We're 5 months out.
Are we almost 6? I should have counted it and yelled at you.
Yeah. CBS this morning. Do you approve or disapprove of the way Donald Trump is handling his job as president? Approve 40, disapprove 54. He's moving into the 30s. And no, I don't mean the 1930s. I mean like the high 30s in his approval. Do you think things in this country are generally going in the right direction or wrong direction? Not a useful one. Right direction, 28, wrong track, 67. It's pretty bad. But the point is you don't know with Republicans whether they're Tom Cotton and unhappy that Trump isn't just flat out shooting people or not. Do you approve or disapprove of the way Donald Trump is handling race relations? Approve 33, disapprove 58. Okay. Yes. Although with Republicans, it's 72-17. Remember, anything below 90 for Republicans is bad. So Trump loses 17% of Republicans on this. He's losing Indies 57-32, and he's losing Democrats 92-4 on the question of race relations, which is going to be a key aspect of the election. Do you think the future of the next generation Americans will be better, worse, or the same? Better 28, worse 47. Are you better off in 4 years? What about in 4 years? He's losing on that one. Okay.
Yes.
And in general, just doing pretty poorly. I mentioned this particular poll because it just came out. That means it encompasses the weekend and some of the other events that have happened. Greg Sargent points out, crucial finding in the new CBS poll, a majority, 57%, now think police are more likely to use deadly force against a black person than a white person. That's up from 43% in 2016. The majority of the country understands that these are police riots and that they're beating up black people. In fact, now they're indiscriminate. They're just beating up people. Okay? And that's hugely important because then when you step back and say, okay, well, is this going to benefit Trump? No, because people understand what's going on here.
Yes.
As Greg Sargent points out, the key reason protests won't help Trump is rising consciousness of systemic racism. And he wrote earlier, a couple of days ago, Democrats don't appear to be spooked by Trump's law and order bluster. Why not? I spoke to the political scientist whose research on 1968 everybody's citing as how, law and order stuff could help the right. And he sees numerous reasons to doubt the parallels to the present.
Okay.
So it's like that Annie Hall scene where Marshall McLuhan is pulled out. Somebody citing him, and McLuhan says, "You know nothing of my work."
Right.
So, I won't mention the person who made the movie. I don't like him, but, it was a pretty important concept there.
It's a well-used, I don't know what, good reference.
Marshall McLuhan, right?
Yes, right.
But the background for all of this just fits the other polls that we are seeing as well, and the whole thing that's happening with the military. So I definitely want to get to that. But, just in terms of just how bad things were for Trump yesterday in the general election, for example, Emerson College, not the greatest poll in the world, Biden 53-47, Trump.
It's a nice college.
They never have any leaners.
Oh, okay.
Or undecideds. Everybody's always decided.
Well, they're very clear thinking.
So, but Biden has 53 in that one. Ipsos, Biden 42, Trump 35. They have a lot of undecideds there.
Yes.
YouGov, Biden 47, Trump 40.
Uh-huh.
Okay, Monmouth, probably the best poll of all of them in terms of quality. Biden 52, Trump 41. That's 11 points.
Okay.
And don't give me this nonsense about, I don't really care about national polls. I only want to know about the states because, electoral college.
Oh, yes, right.
When the national polls, more than 5, it's telling you what you need to know. But let's talk about the states since you brought it up.
Okay.
Right.
You have the polls. You might as well use them.
Fox News, Wisconsin, Biden 49, Trump 40. That's a 9-point lead for Biden in Wisconsin in a Fox News poll. Ohio, right. Fox News, Biden 45, Trump 43. Biden plus 2. Too close to call. But if Ohio is too close to call, that's telling you what's happening with the Electoral College. Yes. Arizona, Fox News, Biden 46, Trump 42. Perhaps more importantly in that poll, Mark Kelly is leading Martha McSally by 13 points. She's toast.
Yeah, she's not even in a race.
Right? It's a rout. And that's what the Arizona papers are calling it.
Okay. Well, she's never won an election for Senate, so.
Well, not this time either. In Texas, Quinnipiac, Biden 43, Trump 44.
Okay.
All right. I mean, if you're looking at Texas and Ohio as being tied,
yes.
And Wisconsin, Biden plus 9, that matches his 11-point lead in the Monmouth poll. I mean, they go together. You can't have one without the other. And so looking at those national polls and understanding their accuracy in terms of the popular vote is important. When the popular vote is close, the Electoral College advantage for Republicans kicks in. When the popular vote is not close, it doesn't.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, that's true. I mean, we do. It's a reasonable objection. We do have an Electoral College. You can make it, we're okay with it because we have an answer. That's all right.
That's all right. And the other side of the coin there, because every time you post a poll, somebody's going to say, well, we're 6 months out, and besides the Electoral College, so don't tell me about national polls. We're not 6 months out, and the national polls matter, okay? So let's just be clear about that. Generic ballot, Monmouth University, Democrat plus 9. YouGov, Democrats plus 6. On average, they're doing about 8. That's about what they did in 2018. We know how that turned out.
Yes. I'm for that.
So all of this, I'm telling you, it feels like when Nixon's popularity started to ebb away. It has a complete, change week feel to it. And, besides the fact that Trump had this ridiculous photo op that failed, we compared it to the Mike Dukakis helmet thing.
Yes.
Matt Bai is comparing Trump's position to Carter's when Carter started to ebb away, when people just decided he wasn't up for the job and he wound up losing
the election. Right.
I don't like Matt Bai, and I think Carter is a much better person than Trump ever was. But there was a point where the public just said, okay, no.
Yes. All right.
And you kind of have that feeling about what's going on now. Now, why do we say that? Because of things that are within the polls. Okay. This is Fox News again. Regardless of how you might vote for, who do you trust to do a better job on the coronavirus pandemic? Wisconsin, Biden 50, Trump 36. Ohio, Biden 45, Trump 39. Arizona, Biden 46, Trump 39. Okay. Race relations. Who would do a better job? Wisconsin, Biden 53, Trump 31. Ohio, Biden 46, Trump 33. Arizona, Biden 50, Trump 34. Suburban women, Wisconsin, Biden 64, Trump 29. Ohio, Biden 54, Trump 40. Arizona, Biden 45, Trump 41, which is why in the Fox poll of the three of them, Arizona's the closest. In terms of, I think the Ohio one is a closer number, but the Arizona one is a little surprising because you'd think that if he's up 9 in Wisconsin, maybe he'd have a bigger lead in Arizona. He doesn't, and this is why. But when you step back and look at all of this, the underlying thing is that Trump is perceived and seen as not being up for the moment and not being able to handle the coronavirus pandemic. He's not able to handle race relations. And, those are dominant.
There are big topics at the moment.
And they're going to stay big topics right up until the election. So that's why, but it's 5 months. Well, things are all going to suddenly start changing. The pandemic's suddenly going to go away. Yes. Trump is suddenly going to become competent. I mean, what part of this is like, why is it too early?
I don't know. Fence should probably fix it, and I
think
the
fence is expanding, right? The fence is going to go now all around North Carolina. Which it should, because in North Carolina, there's a PPP poll out this morning. POTUS, Biden 49, Trump 45. Cunningham 43, Tillis 41, and Cooper 50, Forrest 39.
Okay.
That's governor.
Wow. The PPP
Remember, the governor's important here because he just told the Republicans you can't have your convention.
Yes, right. That's true.
People support that.
Moving it to Doral or Mar-a-Lago or something. I think Miami is the leading contender, where it's hot and will kill all the coronavirus.
Does Miami have a Republican mayor?
I don't know. That's possible.
It's not happening otherwise.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good... I don't know. Armando would know offhand, and I don't. It's entirely possible. I'll look
what does Armando know about Florida except everything?
Right. Yeah. Don't ask him anything. You won't get a chance to finish. Yes. Go on.
Again, the big background here. And so you can smell loser.
Yes, and he should take a shower.
And so how do you know that? Well, you see Secretary of Defense, or perhaps soon-to-be ex-Secretary of Defense, Esper, backing off on the idea of using the military to quell what Trump wants to be a law and order photo op. And not just him.
Okay.
You have all of the chiefs of staff, as well as the Joint Chief of Staff, as well as ex-Secretary of Defense Mattis.
Right.
I mean, Mullen.
And the other ex-Secretary of Defense, the current one.
A whole bunch of people saying this is not what the military's for, guys.
Right.
Ron Brownstein writes, given the critical mass of concern about Trump and Esper that's emerged, seems reasonable at this point to ask if there'll be a more coordinated retired generals effort versus Trump in the 2020 election. And given the indications that older whites who have been leaning are already moving away from Trump, voices like Mattis, Mullen, Allen, et al. Might be particularly powerful validating forces for their concerns. Okay. Something to watch.
All right. Mayor of Miami, yes, Republican, by the way.
Yeah, okay. So maybe that would be an opportunity.
Sure.
Mark Esper's comments reflected the turmoil within the military over President Trump, who said he could put active duty troops on the streets to perform law enforcement functions. Daniel Dresner says, good to know, quote, Pentagon officials note that the military is trained in using lethal power against foreign adversaries, not in law enforcement, and what is appropriate in Fallujah is not in Farragut Square.
Right. You see what happened to people who inappropriately applied force too early in Fallujah.
Here's a Washington Post story about that. Pentagon chief balks at Trump's call for active duty military force and U.S. citizens. Mattis rips president. Obama was out talking yesterday. In fact, all 4 living ex-presidents draw a sharp contrast with Trump on systemic racism. The specific letters from the military chiefs and Mark Milley's in particular. Every member of the U.S. military swears an oath to support and defend the Constitution and the values embedded within it. This is
whatever that means.
Memorandum from the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. As members of the Joint Force comprised of all races, colors, and creeds, you embody the ideals of our Constitution. Please remind all of our troops and leaders we will uphold the values of our nation and operate consistent with national laws and our own high standards of conduct at all times.
Good.
The National Guard is operating under the authority of state governors.
Yes, which is different.
Which is quite different.
They may believe different things.
So all of that matters. All of those are big deal. Trump is essentially trying to posture and to put himself there as the law and order president. I think he would like the police to beat up people so that folks will fight back, and then he can say, see, we have to bring in the military. I mean, that just seems pretty clear. It's also clear it's not working because most of the protests are peaceful. And now he's getting mad at the press for covering peaceful protests when this one isolated incident happened over here.
Right. Or if they can't get that, they just make up the incidents. I've noticed that happening too.
We all understand he's going to do that. We all understand that for the Fox News crowd, some of that might work. But the fact that 11% in the CBS poll of Republicans aren't buying this stuff is huge. Again, that's going to grow. His numbers are going to drop. They only drop when your own party deserts you. It's not going to go down to the 23, 24% that Nixon got. Right? It's not going to drop down to the lowest levels that George W. Bush got. But it's already driving his numbers below 40. Okay. And if he stays where he is and doesn't drop any further, he's already losing, as he likes to say, bigly.
Yeah. He's kind of dropped that.
But those numbers are going to go down. They're going to be in the high 30s.
Yeah.
They already are.
Well, I'm happy to have them there.
The MSN tracker.
Yeah. There are. We've seen a couple of
once in the past month, and so this is not helping him. And so let's not get fooled and cower into a defensive crouch and say that it is.
All right. Not crouch. Got it. I just wrote it down.
Right. I was having this argument with Tom Nichols, one of the prominent Never-Trumpers.
Yeah.
Who said, this is only going to help Trump. And I said, no, Tom, you're wrong. You're missing the moment.
Oh. One of those. Okay, well, I'm glad you...
Then he wrote back, specifically citing me, and said, don't get my hopes up, you bastards. Because he knows I was right.
All right, yes. Well, what can you do? You go to your bag of tricks when asked for comment. And, all right, at least he realized a few minutes later he was wrong.
Yeah, he did. That's why I like him. Okay. He's a curmudgeon, and that's fine. But, the data's there. And it's at state level just as much as it's at national level. And so we shouldn't miss the moment, and we shouldn't not see. Get that there? Not see. Should not see what's going on.
That's a good one. Write that down, too. All right.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, all right. I'm just looking. I'm scrolling back through. I almost forgot about the memo from the Joint Chiefs of Staff in the confusion. One of the major stories of the day. I'm glad that came up again. I'm scrolling back looking for some stories to post about that a little bit later. Okay. I don't know. Anything else going on?
No, just Pew Research Fact Tank was posting something this morning that I think is worthwhile to just remind ourselves of. It's not new, but it's stuff that's certainly worthwhile reminding. A study in contrast Republican and Democratic strengths and weaknesses in party identification. White evangelicals are the most Republican group in the country. 17% Democratic or lean Dem, and 78% Republican or lean Republican. White non-college males, 30% Democrat, 62% Republican. And rural Southerners, 33% Democrat and 60% Republican, lean Republican. Remember, a reminder there. White evangelicals are more Republican than rural Southerners. White evangelicals are more Republican than white non-college men. White evangelicals are 18% of the electorate.
All right. Well, we're stuck with
and white non-college men are 22.
Okay.
All right?
Yeah.
So that's 40%.
Okay.
That's 40% of Trump's base.
I guess so.
That he gets, So it's not like you're going to convince them otherwise. You're going to get there with white non-college men. You're going to unmove the white evangelicals. Don't even try. And just remember, that's our biggest political problem. They need to be outvoted. But the other thing that the polls are starting to show is that there's at least as much enthusiasm for Democrats coming out and voting because they're voting against Trump. That matters.
Yeah. Well, that should excite people at this point, and it's only going to he's only going to make that easier to do.
Right. And Biden is making inroads. And, I'm not so worried about younger voters don't know what to do. Of course they do.
All right. I think they're probably getting
so
it. And
the state of the country right now, again, with this turning, we have all these letters from the military. We have the completely inappropriate, it's more than botched, completely inappropriate photo op. And again, the stories, the TikTok people, the folks who have the insight and the secret whisperings from Jared and Ivanka were, again, first publishing that, the White House was really happy with how this all turned out with this wonderful photo op. They even made a video of it for the campaign. Yes. And by today, it's like, this is a disaster. Who's responsible?
Huh. Well, yeah. So too late. They already said who was responsible, and it's people that they can't get rid of.
Right. Exactly.
What to do about that? I read that there was some excited response. The very conservative evangelicals that you mentioned were actually thrilled to death, and I don't know whether that was who they were going for. It certainly makes some sense because there was a Bible involved, but I think they thought they were going to get broader acceptance for that stunt than they actually got. But it's narrow but deep.
Right. And as Josh Krashauer points out, the markets are lagging indicators, meaning that the betting markets in the last few days have actually switched from Trump being ahead to Biden being ahead. And it's remarkable that the market still rated Trump as the front runner until this week. But Dave Weigel notes the reason betting markets have switched from Trump to Biden is we've now had two big crises, pandemic and unrest, that we're seeing at first for opportunities for Trump to shine. Yes. And his approach actually makes him less popular.
Well, okay. So then everybody's got a good look. The president is in sharp focus with the issues before us, and he's manifestly a failure in all respects.
As Weigel goes on to say, after a point, people stop assuming events can break in his favor and start assuming he'll make more blunders.
Yeah. Well read there. I think that's probably exactly how it'll happen. Okay. Take our break and be right back. Hi, everybody. It's me, David. Let's change things up from the old fundraising pitch for just a minute and talk instead about how you can be a part of our show. If you've got a smartphone or any other electronic recording device, why not sit down and record a segment for us? Read us an important article and give us your take. Or read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Then send the file to me at kagrox@gmail.com, and I'll try and work it into the show. Short segments, a few minutes in length, are easiest to fit in. And of course, I can't always guarantee that I'll be able to play everything, but if you've ever shouted at your radio or TV about something you wish was being covered, here's your chance to change that. Make the show your own. Send your submissions to me at kagrox@gmail.com. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. We continue on here with Greg Dworkin. I guess the generator installation guys are getting ready to work there. So there we go.
Yeah, you'll hear what sounds like a drill in the background. My teeth are already hurting, and so we're going to wrap up fairly quickly. In fact, because we have to turn the power off.
Oh, yes, right.
It'll be off for another 3 or 4 hours here.
You're going to make more after that.
Yeah. But anyway, I don't want to get too far in the weeds, and I just want to step back and look at the big picture. Arguably, this is the week that Trump lost the election for some. For those of us who thought he was going to lose a close election, this is the week where it turned out that the likelihood of Biden actually winning in a rout becomes bigger than Trump winning comfortably.
All right. I'm prepared for those chances to rise and
we still don't know what's going to happen. And yes, 5 months is a long time politically, but
months.
Again, you have to remember that for 3.5 years, Trump's numbers haven't budged. So when they go down, what are the chances they're going to go back up? From what? From who? Who's going to turn around and say, "Oh, okay, let's just support him even more"?
You know what he did well.
Even if they do go back up, they're only going to go back up to where they were.
True, and they were never sufficient.
They were never good. That's a losing number. Everybody who assumed that things are going to get closer assumed that he'd get a great bump out of the pandemic when you have the rally around the flag effect. Everybody assumed he'd have a terrific bump from the law and order stuff. None of these things happened. Okay, and so the idea that all of a sudden his party's going to rally around him and he's going to get a great bump as we get close to November. Maybe. But where's the evidence that's ever happened before? When you are the most unpopular president in history, and when your opponent has an 8-point lead, when in previous elections that you can remember it was more like a 1-point lead or 2-point lead at this point, where's the evidence that such a thing's going to happen? And why do you assume it will?
I don't know.
It might, but you know what? It might not. It might actually drop.
Yeah. It's not his fault. He hasn't run for re-election before. We don't have that evidence. Well, okay.
That's what these numbers are telling us.
Yes. Well, that's
thing is his fault.
That
People
part
blame
is true.
him. He's the president. You're supposed to be in charge.
It's
Only
the
I can
economy stupid. That's all I know. And the economy's doing great. You've seen the stock market. Everything's fine.
Yeah, everything's fine. Anyway, that's my wrap-up for today. I just wanted to put all of this in perspective.
Shoot, we got to do something.
It's nice arguing about what the New York Times can or cannot or should not publish, because that feels like almost normal.
Yeah, maybe that's
but
why
arguing about what Trump should or should not do and can and cannot do generally is a bad argument, because that means he's doing bad things. And I'm really looking forward to that coming to an end. So with that, that's my segment for today. And I'll be back on Monday.
Okay. That sounds like a good idea.
I think all will, I think.
It's probably still going to be legal.
Yeah, we shall see. If we still have a country, we'll be back on Monday.
Yeah.
And remember to make sure that you're registered, and make sure that if you can vote by mail, do so. And remember, if you go protest, please wear a mask.
Yeah, that's also wise. I have seen a couple of notices for protests being scheduled and saying, bring a mask, don't forget. We still have that pandemic thing.
We do. And the numbers are going up and not down at this point. It's a smoldering, not so great situation. But with that, there's always hope.
Hope Hicks.
Market justice,
Right.
Market history bending toward justice and all that. So let's do what we need to do.
I hope so.
And, people support the protest because they understand that it's imperative, it's necessary, why it's happening. This is way different than other things that happen. This isn't Ferguson. And we'll see what happens from this point onward. Take care, and I'll talk to you on Monday.
That's what you think, and I hope so.
That's what I think.
But okay, great. Good luck with all the work there today. Thanks for coming in, despite the noise. Good. All right. Well, he's come around. Yeah. That's good news. Thanks, Greg. All right. Hope it's a smooth sailing, as smooth as it can be for the weekend.
Yep.
All right. Take care. We'll see you on Monday. I hope if the generator installation goes correctly and I don't fry your entire electrical system. I probably shouldn't have said that, because that'll just jinx it. There's by the way, a couple of other interesting parallels that would allow us to move back and forth between the pandemic in progress and the current protest movement and atmosphere. News emerges that George Floyd actually tested positive for coronavirus, and he had gotten a positive test. I think I saw the date go by April 3rd, and I believe that as part of his autopsy report, in which they finally kind of sort of almost admitted how he died, they noted that he had they noted the presence of coronavirus antibodies in his blood. So that's sort of a weird crossover, and I'm sure people are, I don't know how much to take away from it, but it's an item of interest, I guess. As I said, the pandemic continues, and I haven't taken my eye off of it. I didn't discuss it very much yesterday on the show, but I continue to track it on Twitter. I keep looking at the Worldometer's information about it, and people have variously complained about it being somehow inaccurate, or questioning the numbers being reported by governments both here at home and around the world, and all of that is true, but I'm just sticking with the one metric along the way, unless something extraordinary happens, and most other measures, most other monitors of the numbers have come around to something like the same numbers reported within a day or so. Still remains a disaster here in the United States as we approach our 2 millionth reported confirmed case. We're about 3 to 4 days away from that, I would say. We passed 1.9 million cases just yesterday, and the way things have been running, there has been a slight slowdown, or I guess you could say it's even a significant slowdown when you're talking about the numbers that we're talking about in terms of reported cases, whereas somewhat earlier, perhaps April into early May, things were running such that we logged an additional 10,000 cases every 3 to 4 days. It now takes about 4 to 5 days to log an additional 10,000 cases. That's not a whole lot longer, but of course it does indicate a slowing. And, that's good news in terms of ending the disastrous numbers. But on the other hand, I have not yet seen, and I guess we'll have to talk to Greg about this, and maybe this is what they keep talking about the virus just lingering forever or having a second wave, and who knows what might spark the second wave. It could be the protests. It could be the early opening of economies that were not entirely ready for it. It could be any combination of the two or more things. But I've not seen anybody backing off of the initial worries that because there was no natural immunity to this coronavirus, that without a vaccine or effective prophylactic treatment, something in the order of 70% of the world's population, or at least the population here in the United States, could eventually come down with an infection from the coronavirus. And that's some worrying numbers, and I haven't seen anybody change their minds about that. I think they're perhaps changed their minds about how long it would take for all of us to get to that number. But even at 2 million infections, we're still looking at the moment, something in the neighborhood of 0.5% in terms of the total United States population having been infected. I know they were also surprised over in Sweden, where they initially thought by not strictly locking down the way so many other countries have, they could proceed sooner. Well, it's a disputed claim. Some folks said they thought they could proceed to herd immunity much more quickly. Once that became apparent that was not going to happen, or that at least it wouldn't happen according to the usual definition and understanding of herd immunities, they denied that was their aim. But I think even without their lockdown there, they're still running, last I heard, at only about 7% of the main concentration of population of Sweden. That would be in the capital. Only about 7% are actually infected at this point. It's worrisome because, with only 2 million confirmed infections, and I understand that, of course, we all believe that there are far more undetected infections out there. But the concentration to date has been on, that would, if we knew how many people really had it versus how many people were really dying from it, we would know that the mortality from this, from the virus is much lower than the apparent number you get from dividing the number of deaths it's caused by the number of cases we've actually confirmed. And instead of running in the high 5-point-something%, it will eventually be under 1%. But that would require an enormous amount of infection throughout the country. And so far, we just aren't detecting it, not for lack of, it is kind of for lack of testing, but we are boosting those test numbers. We're reportedly past 19 million tests with 2 million confirmed infections. So we're still running about 10% of the testing field showing up. The test positivity rate is still about 10%, and you want to see that get way, way lower. But if it turns out that not 0.5 percentage point of the country, but rather 70% of the country is going to end up getting infected, that's a big multiplier, and we're still sitting at 109,000 plus deaths. That too is taking time to change, The deaths are taking time to change, and the number of additional cases are taking time to change. I think, though, I mean, if you're talking about expanding to 70%, then you're talking in the neighborhood of 1.5 million eventually dead, and perhaps more than that, more towards 2 million. And that's what the last couple of days, Trump, when he speaks about coronavirus at all, and it has been probably a week or more since he's actually said anything about coronavirus pandemic, has said, he's taking credit already for having avoided this 1 million, 2 million deaths, even though he opposed the lockdown that likely prevented it from being an initial occurrence. But since we're still not immune and there's still not a vaccine, I don't know of anything that stands in the way of this thing continuing to spread. It's going to be rather ridiculous, is all I can say. I don't know what to tell you, and I don't know how long it'll take for these deaths or other infections to rack up, but time marches on, and it's continuing to happen. As I mentioned, I guess sometime today we'll get our 110,000 reported deaths from coronavirus, which I remind you, it's not been that long since we passed 100,000, a 10% increase since, I think we were talking about very late April. And so, is that when we got the 100,000th? Yeah, I think so. Or at least now I'm confusing the numbers, whether that was when we hit 1 million cases. So I was figuring it out yesterday. I think it's going to be about 6 weeks in between hitting 1 million cases and then getting to the second million, which is a lot slower than we were worried about. Remember, at the beginning of this thing, we were talking about how the doubling rate of the disease was what was so worrisome. And so we haven't seen that, lightning fast doubling rate. And I think that's been a reaction to our social distancing. We made it impossible for the disease to double as quickly as it would otherwise. And racking up the deaths too, it's not taken that long to get an extra 10% on top of the 100,000 that somehow seemed like it was a declaration of a closing of the books of sort on this thing, and it really isn't. I remember though that Jared Kushner declared the books closed at 60,000 when he declared the response a great success story, and everybody began talking about opening the economy. So just by way of noting that when we reach that 110 figure, that will be 50,000 additional deaths on top of his declaration of success, victory over the coronavirus. That's a pretty remarkable thing too, and we understand why, of course, people will be losing focus on that, because there's a much hotter burning fire happening at the moment, and perhaps we can turn our attention back to that one. I had mentioned to you, let's see, oh dear, all right, let's see what other things we have to share in this front. Oh yeah, okay, I can get rid of that one. I mentioned to you that there was a spooky, weird reaction out there to Trump's church visit among the ultra faithful, I guess you could say. And I thought maybe that would help us understand what was going on in the minds of evangelicals to the extent that we care about that. The Guardian has a piece on that. Matthew Teague is a reporter reporting here. He says from Fairhope, Alabama, which is, I guess, where you would go to find such people. They live all over the place, but you probably have a good bet of finding them there. Matthew certainly did. Here's the title of his Guardian piece. You'll love it. Ready? He wears the armor of God. That's what the orange stuff is, I guess. The armor of God. Evangelicals hail Trump's church photo op. So, like I said, I think that they thought that they were going to get wider acceptance for it, but I'm sure that they thought that evangelicals would go nuts for it, because they'll go nuts for anything he does. Subheader is actually down here below the picture of Trump holding the Bible out, awkwardly, of course, but showing the spine so that everyone can see that it says Holy Bible on it. The president's appeal to his base amid protests was derided by some Christians and also people of every other faith in the world. We should point that out. Others saw a victory in a world of evil. That sounds interesting. By the way, not only derided by some Christians and some of other faiths, but plenty who profess no faith whatsoever. We ought to remind everybody that that's a possibility too. And they also thought it was stupid looking. No surprise there. I think they thought that we would all find it surprising that Christians, but not evangelical nutcases, would still be able to see through this act, but it doesn't surprise me at all. No one accuses Donald Trump of subtlety, the piece begins, when the U.S. president raised a Bible overhead, barely overhead, I don't think you can actually get it up that high, on Monday evening outside St. John's Episcopal Church in Washington, D.C. The sign was unmistakable, an appeal to his white evangelical base for loyalty, as protests and riots roared across America. I mistook it, and I think a lot of people probably did. I don't know how unmistakable it is. It's clearly not unmistakable. Not every Christian answered the call. You'll be surprised to find out. Here's a citation to Reverend Jeannie Gerbasi. We didn't really figure out how to pronounce her name, but that's the Episcopal priest we heard from the other day. She said police used tear gas to drive her and others from St. John's before Trump's appearance. They turned holy ground into a battleground, she told Religion News Service. We got a hold of that piece. But many of Trump's evangelical supporters, far from Washington's political stage, saw the move as a victory in a world rife with evil. I mean, they may very well feel that driving the clergy from an Episcopal church is a good thing because Episcopals are weak unbelievers compared to where they think they stand. But yes, my whole family was flabbergasted, said Benjamin Horbowy. Horbowy. I don't know how he pronounces it. Benjamin Horbowy, we'll guess. I don't know how else to get that out. He's just 37 years old, but he lets us know that he and his family had gathered in Tallahassee, Florida, which perhaps isn't far from Fairhope, Alabama. I don't really know, but it sounds like it. They gathered in Tallahassee, Florida. I guess it would have to be across Florida at least, and then the Panhandle, but all right. I wasn't thinking about this was going to be a geography quiz. I guess I was thinking Panhandle, like Panama City, maybe. All right. Well, they gathered in Tallahassee, Florida, to watch live as Trump walked from the White House to St. John's, which is interesting. That's an interesting way of putting it. Before I go on with this, they gathered to watch him walk live on television, but nobody was supposed to have known what it was he was doing. Was there some sort of advanced notice to evangelical followers? Turn on your TV, I'm going to gas everybody and walk to the church. I don't know whether he told them exactly how he was going to make it happen, but my recollection is that they assembled the press for the Rose Garden speech at like 6:30, and then at 7:10 or so, they started they started the walk. Just before the end of the press conference, they started with the grenades and the gassing of people. I don't really know whether they meant to say that. I'd be very interested to follow up and ask, did they really mean that they gathered to watch him walk to the church, or did they gather to watch the president speak from the Rose Garden because they love the president and everything he does they want to watch? But anyway, I guess more to the point is what happens next. They gathered to watch live, and then he says, my mother just shouted out, God, give him strength. He's doing a Jericho walk. And that struck me as a very interesting thing to say. I've never heard anybody use the terminology, a Jericho walk. And I could immediately, of course, guess what they were thinking about, because I think a lot of us know that story. If you don't, it's explained in the next paragraph. But they made it sound like evangelicals are constantly on the lookout for people who might be doing Jericho walks. It was an amazing conclusion to jump to, given what actually happened. A Jericho walk, the story then continues, in some evangelical circles, refers to the biblical book of Joshua, where God commanded the Israelites to walk 7 times around the opposing city of Jericho, whose walls then came crashing down. I think you probably remember the story if you ever heard it somewhere in the recesses of your mind, unless you're a biblical scholar, in which case, congratulations. But I thought that was an odd thing to compare. I mean, the comparison between the biblical walk around the walls of Jericho and what happened at St. John's Church is they walked. That's it. The ambulation can't really be the common point here, can it? Is that all there is to it? He doesn't walk around anything, and God knows Trump is not going to walk around anything 7 times, unless it's the buffet table. I suppose that's possible, but not without a snack. Anyway, he's not going to walk that far. It was across the street, and the whole point was that the walk was what was supposed to bring the battle to an end, I guess. And here the battle had been fought for him by everybody else, and then he sort of shuffled his way across the street, and then he held up a Bible outside of a church and then went home. I don't see any comparison whatsoever, except for the fact that they walked. But they'll see what they want to see, I guess. Harbaugh already supported Trump politically. The younger guy, 37, Benjamin, says he heads the local chapter of a pro-Trump motorcycle club. It's a good way to spend your time. And is campaigning for a seat in Florida's state Senate. So watch out for that if you live in the neighborhood. I don't know whether he's running in the Tallahassee area or not, but be sure to defeat him. But when Trump lifted the Bible, Harbaugh and his family felt overcome spiritually. This was actually a deeply meaningful moment somehow. I think they just constructed it in their minds. They want to believe everything is a deeply meaningful moment with Trump. My mother started crying. She comes from Pentecostal background, and she started speaking in tongues, which might have been the hydroxychloroquine talking. I haven't heard her speak in tongues in years, he said. I thought, look at my president. He's establishing the Lord's kingdom in the world. Oh, boy. They're lost causes. What can you do? Did he feel that conflicted with the Gospel of John, where Jesus said, my kingdom is not of this world? Well, Harbaugh said, that's a philosophical question. So, all right, don't try to outlogic them. It's not going to work. After watching Trump's gesture, Harbaugh changed his Facebook profile photo to one of Trump outside St. John's, with added rays of light emanating from the Bible. That's nice. It was the coolest thing he could do. What more could he do? Wear blue jeans and ride in on a horse? He said. I don't really know how to deal with that kind of mind. I don't really know why that would improve the picture at all. Anyway, the catalyst for the protests, as you know, as I guess is required in the piece here, the killing of 46-year-old George Floyd by Minneapolis police. Asked about that, that's why you have to bring it up. Harbaugh said, there's a Bible verse that says we shouldn't talk about evil things. We can just say, there's evil, and move on. Like I said, there's no logic to deal with. Don't argue, just outvote. He couldn't remember the exact verse, he said, because it's important, I believe, literally in every word of the Bible. I just can't remember any of them. I can't either. So how did devotees like Harbaugh become such a potent force that Trump would signal them in his hour of need? I think, again, too much credit for him being strategic about it. I think he thought Americans all love Bibles because it's a Bible and a church and something, and I'm going to go there and I'm going to hold up a Bible. Who could criticize me for holding up a Bible outside of a church? People who are looking for, obvious meaning of some kind and, looking for your understanding or sharing some values, perhaps some of the values that are in the Bible with them. There's a lot of things people might have wanted out of this. But okay, the idea that it was a strategic signal directly to evangelicals is something evangelicals would believe about it, but probably nobody else. And maybe I think it gives them too much credit to approach the question from that point of view. But what else are you going to do interviewing these guys, right? So how did those kinds of people become such a potent force that Trump would signal them in his hour of need? One answer lies in their relationship with Trump. They have given him their fervent support at the ballot box, and in turn, they have seen a conservative takeover of the courts and an assault on reproductive and LGBTQ plus, and they use that terminology, rights. I think he probably could have done it by, broadcasting live from the Oval Office and bowing his head in prayer. He would have gotten the same thing. I don't know that this was necessary. And really, no matter what he did, I think if he had broadcast himself eating McDonald's French fries by the fistful, evangelicals would have said he's establishing God's deep fryer dominion on earth. And they would have believed it and would have found some kind of passage from the Bible that hinted in their minds that God meant for the followers of Jesus to establish a fast food franchise on earth and disseminate his word through French fries. They will just believe it if they need to. Their power and worldview is a culmination of trends that started decades ago, according to John Fee, F-E-A. One day, someone will let me know about that. According to John here, a history professor at Messiah College and himself an evangelical Christian. It's rooted in fear, he said, and that seems like pretty much everything about evangelicals, all rooted in fear. In the 1980s, he said, several forces converged to alarm white Christians. A removal of official prayer and Bible readings from schools, an influx of immigrants from Asia and the Middle East, and the final desegregation of schools like Bob Jones University. That must have shocked the hell out of them that Bob Jones University is being desegregated. No wonder it's the end of the world. Yeah, it happened a little earlier than the 1980s, I think. But then again, an important part of putting that in there, by the way, these are forces that converge to alarm white Christians. Very properly put, Matthew. Well done, because there are significant numbers of black evangelical Christians, many of whom actually do support Donald Trump, more of whom I think do not, but they stand apart, or the white Christians at least insist that they do. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show. We are on Edwards Radio. Let's continue on with this reading from The Guardian. Yes, so he describes the various forces that converge to alarm white Christians, and so came the emergence of the Christian right, he said. Figures like Jerry Falwell, but not his son, who has nothing to do with the church and isn't a pastor and doesn't believe in any of this stuff, but is instead earning his living from running the university founded by his father, Liberty University. Figures like Jerry Falwell and James Dobson started wielding political influence in a new way, followed today by a new generation that includes Franklin Graham and the Dallas pastor Robert Jeffress, one of Trump's leading evangelical defenders. What seems to be missing in much of the coverage is that a group of protesters had tried to burn the church to the ground 24 hours earlier, Jeffress said, and that's highly debatable. Jeffress sees no conflict between Trump's behavior and the Bible he held up on Monday evening. You mean, does he pretend to be perfectly pious, he said? No. Well, does he pretend to be pious at all? Yes, he does pretend that. Fay calls faith leaders like Jeffress court evangelicals. Trump has, that's interesting, court, not the federal courts, I don't think, but court like court jester or the king's court evangelicals. Trump has these people around him, Fay said. They're telling him, you need to get your evangelical base on board. That's interesting, by the way, as political analysis. I would, I guess if I were one of the evil people actually advising Trump politically, I might remind him, you don't need to get your evangelical base on board. Your evangelical base is on board no matter what you do. If you're really thinking about what you need to get on board in order to actually win the election on the up and up, you need to get other people on board. The evangelicals are there no matter what, but they're not enough. To which probably Trump would say, well, we are cheating, so I guess it doesn't really matter. Now, is getting other people on board hard or easy? Well, it could be very hard. Well, how about this? Would making a show to the evangelicals in order to get them to rally to my side be hard or easy? That would be easy. Well, then let's do the easy thing and then cheat. How about that as a strategy? And you can't argue. It has worked before. People once concerned with piety, Fay said, now crave, quote, an exercise in pure political power. And the Bible is no longer a spiritual weapon, but an earthly one. When Trump describes himself as a law and order president and holds aloft the Bible, he conflates which law he will enforce and whose order will follow. In a short speech before the walk to St. John's, Trump said he would, quote, dominate the streets. That is the, quote, kingdom in the world that Harbaugh referenced. I believe it's like Ephesians chapter 6, verses 10 through 19. Harbaugh said these he remembered. Harbaugh saying, I guess it says here, I believe that this is a president who wears the full armor of God. But one of those verses, I'm not familiar, but verse 12 says explicitly that, quote, we do not wrestle against flesh and blood, but against spiritual enemies. Well, Harbaugh said, he's fearless. So that's it. I mean, that's the end of the story. It's one more example of like, well, but what you're saying is actually not reflected in those passages at all. In fact, the opposite is reflected in those passages. Well, the point is he's very strongly powerful. So, you know, basically they're just adopting the position of whatever this idiot says, it's very godly. And if we can't figure out how, well, that's just God working in strange and mysterious ways. So, okay, point well taken. You can't deal with them. You can't argue with them. You can't out-logic them. They don't use logic. It doesn't mean anything to them. So I guess, like Greg says, you stop trying and just count their numbers and try and make sure you have more. Outvote them. That's about it. All right. There's about a million different things, as always, that I could share with you. And I don't even know which direction to go in next. There's so much. Although every day I end up scrolling down through Pocket and saying, I just didn't get that far into Pocket. I wish I had, because then I would have shared this, which has been waiting for so long. And maybe what I need to do is scroll down and try and find some of those things, and then I will have fulfilled that part of the mission. But now I wish there was some way. There's really no way to mark these things in Pocket in a way that makes sense. Let me see if I can't scroll way down and see. Maybe I've gone too far. It's hard to tell. Boy, there's an awful lot. Okay, well, I guess we'll do it this way. I think this will have taken us a little further than I wanted to go, but yeah, well, let me throw this in there. I had mentioned to you, this is going to flip over to the coronavirus side once again. We'll have to flip-flop between stories here. Maybe the full reading of the story is not necessarily warranted here, but I will bring to your attention the fact that this is out there when the temptation arises to draw from the news the headlines and the conclusions that it will have been the protests that brought about a second spike in coronavirus cases, if that indeed comes to pass. I've already warned you, we're missing the story of the rest of America, which is not protesting, going out to bars and restaurants and shops, etc., either thinking that the problem is over or refusing to wear masks. I essentially remember that we've been warned here. You can go out, you can do these things, you can restart the economy, which is what everybody said that they wanted to do, even if they were just protesting that they wanted a haircut. All you got to do is wear a mask. And of course, there's a huge amount of mask resistance out there all of a sudden, because it's something scientists say might work. And so therefore, that's stupid, and I don't believe that because I'm anti-science and anti-logic. So there's more than just people who don't like wearing masks or think that it's unnecessary. It goes beyond that. I saw this headline in the Washington Post where back on May 28th, way back in that last month we were in, the headline, "Sorry, no mask allowed." Some businesses pledge to keep out customers who cover their faces. Interesting, and I guess probably should be at this point an expected reaction to people who are angry about stores that won't let them in without masks. So that's the case here in Virginia. It's always posted at the doors. They're not that good at enforcing it because, of course, businesses want people's money, and if people come in without masks, they say, oh, darn it, you weren't supposed to do that. I'm in the grocery store every once in a while. Every time I'm there, somebody's in there without a mask, and I wonder about it because it's right on the front door. It says that, and there's an employee out there in front with a mask on who's cleaning the carts for people to use, but nobody enforces anything because you can't, customer's always right. You can't throw people out. I assume that small retail stores where the business owner is present and in charge, and it's not, an overarching corporate policy that they have to deal with, maybe they're enforcing it more. Well, here is the flip side. You got people who are sure that masks show weakness, and so therefore, just to show you, I'll show you. I mean, it should make no difference to them if you come in with a mask or not. If you want to be weak and eat at my restaurant, that should be fine. If your interest is just in opening the economy and allowing people to get haircuts and meals and eat them indoors. But it's not. It's a political movement. So what do we have here? Teo Armas reporting for the Post here. For 64 days, Kevin Smith, not the movie guy, Kevin Smith had shut down the Liberty Tree Tavern, because of liberty, to comply with government orders. But now he realized how much he loves liberty. Now he was cleaning and disinfecting. Why? And removing stools to cut seating by 3/4 as he prepared to reopen the bar. Plexiglass screens had gone up at the supermarket checkout. His neighbors in Elgin, Texas, were still wearing masks outside, even after it was no longer mandated by the county. He did not think such a response was necessary, he said, and he wanted to push back. "Sorry, no mask allowed," read the poster taped to the front door of his bar Friday. "Please bear with us," B-A-R-E, which maybe, if you want to give him the benefit of the doubt, that's a double entendre. He's bearing his face. You see, "Please bear with us through the ridiculous, fearful times." But I think he just doesn't really know which word he was using. As statewide coronavirus orders are easing, many stores and restaurants nationwide have taken the opposite route. They have made face coverings a requirement, kicking out those who fail to comply and even going to court to enforce their directives. Yet, in the emergent culture war over masks, a handful of businesses, the Liberty Tree Tavern among them, are fashioning themselves as fortresses for the resistance. If we're only allowed to be at 25% capacity, I want them to be the 25% of people that aren't, it's printed here as P and then a bunch of dashes. People who aren't P words of some kind. It's actually printed with the dashes. That aren't sheep, Smith told the Washington Post. "Being scared all the time isn't good for your health. It suppresses your immune system." He's very scientific, as it turns out. We should, by the way, go back to Smith and ask him what he thinks of the protests that are going on. And he will, of course, tell you, well, I have my AR-15 and I patrol my neighborhood with my friends looking for suspicious characters, and I'm boarding up my windows because looters are going to be flown in from Somalia by the Antifa super soldiers who are looking to take over the country. But don't be walking around scared all the time. It's not good for your health. It'll suppress your immune system. Why is everybody so afraid? I wonder all of a sudden. It's very odd, don't you think? At one Kentucky gas station, no one is allowed inside the adjacent convenience store if they are wearing a mask. I suppose you could perhaps justify it in certain locations by saying, well, I don't want masked people coming in here. They may rob me. Normally a convenience store to gas station, people come in with a mask. That's what you're thinking. So, I don't know. They might be able to get away with that one. I guess they can do whatever they want. Near Los Angeles, a flooring store encourages hugs and handshakes while prohibiting face coverings. And I got to tell you, if I'm there for like rugs or linoleum or tile or whatever, and they're like, we got to have a hug, I'm like, I got to find another floor covering store. That's not coronavirus talking. That's just, I really don't understand why I have to hug you in order to get, tiling for my bathroom. The owner of a campground in rural Wisconsin vowed to treat clients of a campground, sporting them inside her facilities as she would a robbery in progress. I think we actually heard about that one. That might have been in the Washington Post too. Scientific and medical experts agree people should cover their faces in public to stop the spread of the coronavirus, which has killed at least 100,000 people in the United States. The CDC maintains that masks serve as an especially important safeguard in crowded spaces where social distancing is impossible. But Smith, who said he did not believe the virus poses a serious threat, wanted to stir the pot. So there you go. Whatever. I mean, we could read on with this, but it's just a bunch of jerks doing stupid things at this point. And basically, I don't know what to tell you. We're gonna read about another bunch of idiots who don't believe that the virus is real, and you can read that alongside the stories of other people who said, I don't believe the virus is real, and then they got it and they died, or they got it and their wife died, and they posted to Facebook about how sorry they are and how they have conversion experience, etc. But it does no good for these guys. So, all right. Anyway, that exists, and it's out there, and it's frustrating and annoying, of course. But yet, at the same time, like I said, when I have seen notices of planned protests, even for my little corner of the world, and the protests that I have seen in my corner of the world, people are wearing masks. So I don't know about those headlines that are going to try and blame this on the protest movement. They've been pretty heavily masked, and they really, generally speaking, come from that segment of the population which adheres to those rules for the most part. I just thought you should, kind of keep that in mind and give that some thought. All right, these jerks are out there. By the way, there is some, I did see the other day, and I know I saw Zeynep Tufekci talking about this too. She's been kind of interested in this from the beginning, but I saw her sharing some, I guess there are some scientific papers out there in whatever stage of the publication process now that that argue that perhaps the cloth masks that we've all had to use in the absence of enough medical grade masks to go around for members of the general public without depriving frontline medical workers, that the cloth masks aren't particularly effective in preventing the spread of the disease. But I think my quick skim of the summaries of the articles, it appears that, for like laboratory standards, I see what they're talking about. Apparently they're concerned that, if you cough through the cloth mask, an awful lot of the germs and, in the case of coronavirus, the virus ends up coming through the weave of the cloth and either escaping anyway or coming to rest on the outside surface of the mask, which is not where you want it. I guess you would want it to remain on the inside surface of the mask, but that apparently doesn't happen. But again, I think it sort of loses sight of the purpose of cloth masking. I don't see how it's possible that it could really be the case that that it is. How could it not be the case that you're not spreading less germs by being masked? And if two people are masked in an exchange, there are two barriers. It has got to be better. It might not be super effective, but it's better than nothing. It just has to be the case. But I think they're nitpicking and saying, well, it's possible that with the germs coming to rest on the outside surface of the mask when people don and doff the mask, as we've been warned is a problem, you could be spreading it that way by getting it on your hands and either moving your hands to your face or touching other people or other surfaces. But if you're not doing that, then I imagine it's effective enough that you want to continue to warn people to use them. At the very least, it's a good warning and a good reminder for people not to be touching their faces all the time. And that was something we learned in the opening days of our response to the pandemic. So I'll see about whether I can dig up that reference too. I might have to go looking through Zeynep's Twitter feed in order to find it again. It may have been buried under a flood of other information. But anyway, worth keeping an eye on. and maybe they'll come up with better ideas about what kind of barriers we need to use, or good reminders for general hygiene practices, donning and doffing masks. Look for those in the near future, I suppose. But in the meantime, I would go on wearing the masks. Let's see. That reminds me, there was an interesting report from CNN's Manu Raju, who on the same day, the 28th, apparently went around interviewing members of, as he calls them, the GOP's No Mask Caucus, asking several Republicans who appeared on the House floor unmasked, why were they doing it, and what did they think about the whole masking situation. And you got an interesting variety of responses from people who said, oh, the masks work, I understand that, but I just happen to have forgotten my mask at the moment, or it was really uncomfortable, and I just don't think there's that much danger, and I'm trying to generally stay away from people, to others who insist through their Christian evangelical world viewpoint that, again, the masks are not only unnecessary, but people who want to use them are stupid, and you shouldn't use them because remember that really awkward, weird, outrageous argument that was once put forth? There was one member of Congress, let's see if I can identify him, might as well take a look, who used that thing about, well, you're created in the image of God, and if you're covering your face, then you're somehow disrespecting God, which was an extraordinarily tenuous argument, I thought, to make. I think it was Clay Higgins from Louisiana. Yeah, there it is. And also pointing out his argument was, he asked Manu Raju, can you smell through that mask? If you can smell things, basically was his thought, then things were getting through. And you're not stopping a virus because smells are, I guess, really tiny, even tinier than virus. I don't know what the thought was. But if anything's getting through, then everything will get through, and therefore it was useless. And he says, so if you can smell through the mask, he says, you're not stopping any sort of a virus. And then goes on to add, in case you're not convinced, it's part of the dehumanization of the children of God. You're participating in it by wearing a mask. Just one of many awfully stupid things that Republicans had to say to Manu Raju about why they weren't wearing masks. And you should take a look. Let's see. Also on the coronavirus front, I guess I'll add my own continued observation of the numbers over at Worldometers. I've been looking a little more closely. Well, one, keeping an eye on which countries around the world are racing up the charts in terms of total number of cases, in terms of number of cases per million in population, number of deaths per million in population, and also which states in the United States are rapidly climbing up the charts. And the last couple of days have been really interesting for the U.S. charts. If you looked at numbers like who reported the most new cases of coronavirus in the last day or in the day before, new contenders are rising to the top. Of course, they don't offer up new cases per million in population for the states, the United States, constituent states of the U.S. So I can't tell that. So it stands to reason that the larger states, the more populous states, will be a part of that sort of top 10 list, the top 10 states in terms of reporting of new cases. But there are some surprises in the roster. And if I go there now and take a look at new cases, I'll have to flip over to yesterday's data, and ranked in order of new cases reported are California, stands to reason because of course, the population. But remember, they were the ones who thought, oh, we did the coronavirus right. They're the coast that thought they did coronavirus response right, and that it was the East Coast that really blew it. But at the moment, they're sitting at the top of the new cases reported. Yesterday's number at Worldometers, anyway. And a lot of people dispute the Worldometer day-by-day numbers, mostly because I think it's keyed to Greenwich Mean Time because it's a worldwide issue. And so the days begin and end at different times than we think of them beginning and ending here on, say, the East Coast of the United States. But California, in this case, reporting 2,298 new cases. And then another big top population state, Texas. But that was, of course, one of those places where, the virus is a hoax and it's really just affecting New York and maybe San Francisco liberals and it's never going to make its way here. Texas reporting 1,464 cases. And then it goes on from there. So here's the order. California, Texas, Florida, North Carolina. Those are the 4 states reporting more than 1,000 new cases yesterday. Illinois comes next, and then Arizona. And then, hey, remember when this was the epicenter of everything? New York. New York no longer the tops of the list from this thing. California, Texas, Florida, North Carolina, Illinois, Arizona, New York, Maryland, Georgia, Virginia, and then New York's companion in the most intense outbreak, New Jersey. All right, all the way down there. New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Indiana, Tennessee, Ohio, Massachusetts, Louisiana, Minnesota, Washington, Michigan. Michigan was like, oh my God, it's the next serious outbreak epicenter. All the way down there. Mississippi, Utah, Iowa, Colorado, Missouri, Nebraska. Okay, well, you know how many states there are. It's just sort of an interesting set up at the top. The day before I ran through the same list on Twitter, Tennessee was up there. And I guess Tennessee is hit or miss in terms of when they're reporting and when they're not. But they were a surprise entrant into the top of the charts for most new cases. I guess yesterday they reported a mere 447 new cases. But in terms of, there are a few things done by population. And it's still, of course, the case that the initial surge of cases in New York and New Jersey keeps them at the top of the list. It's still Northeastern dominated in total cases per 1 million in population and total deaths by 1 million in population. But yeah, what they really need to do is to be able to sort who's got the most intense number of new cases. That's the figure that we really should be looking for. Anyway, I just thought I'd bring that to your attention because I flipped by something from the Times Free Press down in Tennessee. And I guess this is an interesting way of putting it. The Chattanooga Times Free Press. The headline here is New York Times report. Well, the New York Times, of course, has been tracking the coronavirus rather closely. So they're relying on the New York Times for this down in Chattanooga. That report says now that Chattanooga is now in the top 5 nationally for new coronavirus cases as deaths and cases continue to rise. So I guess I should really be looking at the New York Times figures on this. Maybe they've got the numbers I need. But there you go. That's the news with 2 new deaths, just 2. Remember, these are smaller scale cities. Chattanooga compared to New York City, that's how it's going to be. But with 2 new deaths and 186 new cases since Friday, this was a report from when? May 26th. But that tells them that Hamilton County's continued increase in positive coronavirus tests has placed it among the fastest growing caseloads in the nation, I guess on a per capita basis. According to a report by the New York Times early Tuesday, Chattanooga's rate of new cases per day is the 5th highest in the nation, doubling about every 9 days. And remember, that doubling rate was what we were looking at. Let's take a look at that New York Times report, by the way. The highest average daily growth rates in cases. And this is the sort of information you really need parsed out for you, because if you're just scanning the headlines and going by feel and what you hear on the radio and television, you wouldn't guess this. But the data is the data, and it's important to know. So right here before the break, I'll give you a quick rundown. The highest average daily growth rate of cases as of the end of last month. Anyway, number 1 on the list, Logan, Utah, with a daily growth rate of 21%, cases doubling every 3.6 days. That is pretty remarkable, don't you think? And you will never guess. You never put this list together in your head in a million years. Logan, Utah, Huntsville, Texas, Fayetteville, Springdale, Arkansas is next on the list. Hanford, Corcoran, California. And number 5, El Centro, California. The highest average daily growth rate of deaths is the one that I guess that, although now I don't see Chattanooga on this list either. Laurel, Mississippi, Kokomo, Indiana, California, Lexington Park, Maryland. Interesting. That is an odd combination of names there. We'll be right back. Hi, it's me, David Waldman, your host for Kagro in the Morning, and I've learned that I either need to update these announcements more often or stop saying that the announcements are brand new. What's not new is that this message, too, is a call for your support in keeping the Kagro in the Morning show on the air. My thanks go out to all of you who do support the show through your donations. The stats say that Kagro in the Morning fans download our program about 2,000 times each weekday, but our donors make up only about 8% of our daily listeners. Patreon.com, Patreon.com, makes it simple to make easy, secure, recurring monthly contributions to support our show. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. If we're helping keep you sane during the Trump era, consider what that's worth. $1 a day? 50 cents? One thin dime? We do about 20 shows a month, so pick a number, do the math, and head to Patreon.com/KagroX to let us know. Thanks again, everyone, for all your support. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Networks Radio. Let's see. I might as well continue on with this because I think it's kind of a surprising set of data. How did they get to the Chattanooga? Maybe this is maybe they must have linked me to. Did they link me to something that was a static report, or is this something that is dynamic? And so therefore, let's see. I don't see where Chattanooga comes in at number 5, but it may be, again, this is a dynamic report. But this is pretty interesting. 5 ways, this piece from the New York Times is 5 ways to monitor the coronavirus outbreak in the U.S. And it does say, updated for today, or from yesterday, rather. So at least it's somewhat dynamic. To help provide a detailed picture of the past, present, and future of the coronavirus pandemic in the U.S., here are 5 ways of thinking about it in hundreds of metro areas across the country using data compiled by the New York Times. This page will be updated regularly. The big picture is first, new cases and deaths. The simplest way to track the progress of an outbreak is by seeing how many new cases and deaths are reported in a given area each day. For the United States as a whole, these counts appear to have peaked or are starting to flatten, which is why everybody says we can open up. But of course, once you parse it down to, well, how are they doing in your area? If you paid attention to that news, you might disagree about opening up. But then if that were the case, then you would say, I don't want to share that information. Let's open. And then we'll see what happens, I guess. Here is, in fact, a chart showing the number of new cases nationally and deaths per day nationally, and it is indeed appear to be sloping down, which is a good thing. But again, since it happened in population-heavy New York City, once New York City gets its outbreak under control, it masks the increases happening in smaller cities around the country. Let's see. Moving on to the second way of looking at things, where the outbreak is worst now. Wouldn't you want to know that? The metro areas with the greatest number of recently announced cases and deaths relative to their population. Hooray. In the last 2 weeks. In the last 2 weeks, new cases. Who's getting hit the worst? The answer, again, places you might not have guessed, although now that I've mentioned some of them, you might have guessed. Number 1, most cases in an area in the United States over the last 2 weeks, which is the critical period, right? 2 weeks. Huntsville, Texas. And it's got a status next to it that says, how's the growth in cases going? And the answer is still growing. Want to know where it's still growing? There's still growing. There's flat or decreasing is the other category. But tops of the list in Huntsville, Texas, where they had 1,136 new cases, I guess, over the last 2 weeks, a rate of 13 new cases per 1,000 in population. Deaths, the other category, new deaths in the last 2 weeks. Where would it be? Anyone want to guess? It is in a place where the numbers are flat or decreasing, so that's good news. But I guess they're still on their way down from a steep curve. Milledgeville, Georgia. Yeah, you probably wouldn't have guessed that. 31 deaths, or 0.58 per 1,000. That earns them a hot red color ranking there. The most new deaths in the last 2 weeks in an area that's still growing goes to number 6 on the overall new deaths list, Kokomo, Indiana, recently mentioned, followed by Marion, Ohio, a gun fail hotspot, by the way. Marion, Ohio always has been. Indiana, too, to some extent, and that makes a certain amount of sense. Those places where it's still growing: Kokomo, Indiana, number 6. Marion, Ohio, number 7. Sandusky, Ohio, number 11. Poor Ohio. And, hey, Muncie, Indiana, where it's still growing. All those places out in the Midwest where they said, we're not coastal elites. We don't have to do anything about this. The full list of new deaths, though: Milledgeville, Georgia; Gallup, New Mexico. That would be our Navajo nation, I think, registering those numbers. Thankfully, flat and decreasing there. And Meridian, Mississippi as well. Flattening, not necessarily decreasing is Laurel, Mississippi. Farmington, New Mexico, also flat and decreasing. Then Kokomo, Marion; Providence, Rhode Island; Worcester, Massachusetts; Sioux City, Iowa, our meatpacking plants; Sandusky; New Haven, Connecticut; Muncie, as earlier mentioned; Springfield, Massachusetts at 14; Hartford, Connecticut at 15. And then where does the New York City area rest in all of this? Because just by way of comparison, 43rd in new deaths last week. Now, mind you, again, the numbers are such that the New York City area, the greater New York City area, still registers 2,000 deaths in the last 2 weeks, as compared to the number 1 on the list, which registers 31 deaths, right? The numbers are small, and people are so freaked out by seeing the New York numbers that they think, oh, it's not a big deal. But it is a big deal. You don't have that many people there. And by per capita, on the per capita basis, you've got 5 to 6 times the numbers of new deaths per capita in the last 2 weeks that New York had in Milledgeville, Georgia. That's the number. How many per 1,000 in the New York area? 0.1 per 1,000 new deaths over the last 2 weeks. In Milledgeville, Georgia, 0.58 per 1,000 in the last 2 weeks. All right, you can look at the raw numbers if you want to, but they're your neighbors dying. What about the new cases? Maybe, I guess, an early look. In about 2 weeks, I guess you'll see those cities and new cases perhaps migrate over to the new deaths section in order to give people time to actually fight the disease, and some of them, unfortunately, will lose. Again, tops on the list: Huntsville, Texas; El Centro, California, both still growing; Gallup, New Mexico, unfortunately, on number 3 on that list; Yakima, Washington, still growing; Show Low, Arizona, still growing. Remember when that made the news? Why was that in the news? I think it was probably a gun fail issue way back when. Hanford, Corcoran, California; Laurel, Mississippi; Salem, Ohio; Yuma, Arizona, still growing. Everyone else is not growing unless I say so. Vineland and Bridgeton, New Jersey. Interesting. Sioux City, Iowa, again. Racine, Wisconsin. Montgomery, Alabama, which we heard about the other day, running out of ICU beds. Good news here. Flat or decreasing for Montgomery. Alamogordo, New Mexico, still growing. Farmington, New Mexico, not. And by comparison, where is the New York City area? 102 on the list of areas with the most new cases in the last 2 weeks. By population, of course. Again, what does that mean? Per 1,000 residents of the New York City area, there were 1.2 out of every 1,000 residents in the area became a newly detected, newly confirmed case of coronavirus in the last 2 weeks. That means 23,916 new cases over the last 2 weeks for the New York metropolitan area, as opposed to 1,136 new cases in the Huntsville, Texas area. So isn't New York still the place? Well, again, not by percentage of the population. 1.2 out of every 1,000 people in the New York City area became a new case, but 13.02 of every 1,000 people in the Huntsville, Texas area became a new case. 13 new cases out of every 1,000 versus 1 in the New York City area. But people continue to ignore it. We got to have our Liberty Taverns open up. Now, let's see. The Times commentary on it continues. Here, we've limited the window of cases to those within the last 2 weeks. Scaling those cases by the population of the area can help give a sense of the prevalence of the illness there and how strained a community's healthcare system may be. Places with curves that are flattening or flat are likely to move down this list over time. Those where new cases and deaths continue to increase are on a track to move up. Of course, case counts are subject to variable rates of testing. Cases could fall in places simply because fewer tests are being done, so moderate changes in rankings on these tables may not always be meaningful. The next section, the third way of looking at things, where outbreaks might come next. The virus has begun cropping up in new places as it spreads across the country. To identify places that could flare up next, it's helpful to look not just at the number of cases, but how fast they are rising. And again, as I mentioned earlier, highest average daily growth rate of cases, Logan, Utah, Huntsville, Texas, Fayetteville, Springdale, Arkansas. I got down to Hanford, Corcoran, California, El Centro, California, Abilene, Texas, Yuma, Arizona, Texarkana, Texas, and Arkansas, of course, twin cities there. Alamogordo, New Mexico, or I guess it's not a twin, but you get the point. Russellville, Arkansas, Chattanooga, Tennessee, now down to 11 out of rather than number 5. So congratulations there, I guess, although it doesn't indicate whether that's because they're getting better or whether other people are just getting worse. Rapid City, South Dakota, Niles, Michigan. Niles, is that how they say it? Decatur, Alabama, St. George, Utah, and then where does the New York City area fall? 315th on the list. And the evening stat here that makes things more relevant and understanding is they're ranked by how many days it takes for their local caseload to double. And that's an interesting thing, too, also, that will happen when you're looking at populations. High population areas in the beginning of the pandemic, it'll double very quickly because there's so many people to spread it and spread it to. But after a while, when you have thousands and thousands of cases, in order to double, you have to get another couple thousand cases, and that's going to take a while. How long does it take for cases to double at the current rate in the New York City area? 205.4 days. How many days does it take for the local caseload to double in Logan, Utah? 3.6 days. A daily growth rate of 21%. By the way, statistically speaking, New York City's growth rate is so low that it is only reflected as a 0% growth rate here, though obviously it's not zero, it's point something. But there you have it. That's but in Logan, Utah, they say, hey, we only have 213 cases. New York's got 23,900 cases. Well, there's only 10 of you there, man. You're going to have to deal with it. So, and we learned from Greg's repetition of the checkerboard or the chessboard and rice parable. Doubling is a disastrous situation to find yourself in. Also, the highest average daily growth rate of deaths. That, too, is evened out by doubling. Laurel, Mississippi tops on that list with their deaths doubling every 10.2 days for a 7% daily growth rate. Kokomo, Indiana is next, then California, Lexington Park, Maryland. Racine, Wisconsin. Bowling Green, Kentucky. The Bowling Green Massacre finally arriving in Bowling Green, Kentucky. 5% daily growth rate in deaths there. Tuscaloosa, Alabama. Montgomery, Alabama. Alexandria, Louisiana. Macon and Greater Bibb County, Georgia. Dunn, North Carolina, Fayetteville, North Carolina, Winston-Salem, North Carolina, Marion, Ohio, again, Pottsville, Pennsylvania, Grand Rapids, Michigan, New York City area coming in at 210th on the list. Growth rates are useful measures in epidemics because they tell us whether things are getting better or getting worse. In places where the growth rate is high but the number of cases is relatively low, a community may still have time to flatten the curve before an outbreak becomes widespread. But how do you flatten the curve? You flatten the curve by keeping social distance and keeping your stores and restaurants closed. Where are they abandoning social distancing, resisting mask wearing, and opening up their bars, restaurants, barber shops, and gyms in the places where they say, hell, New York has thousands of cases and we only have hundreds or tens. Let's open up among the 15 of us here in this small town. Pretty soon you're all going to be sick, but you'll say, yeah, it was okay because, you know, we weren't as grim a picture as New York City with their thousands and thousands. But if relative to New York City you're doing worse, you shouldn't be opening. But they don't, for whatever reason, want to pay attention to those data sets. Communities with a lot of cases and a high growth rate are on track to have a serious problem. A high growth rate on top of a large number of cases means that a still larger number of people are on track to become ill or die. You and I can make that conclusion. I guess it just never occurs to anybody else. Where might there be good news ahead? Number 4 on the list here. Here are the metro areas where new cases and deaths have decreased the most in population-adjusted basis in the last week. That's nice. Some good news for some of these other small cities at last. It's not just that everything is on the way up. Amarillo, Texas, and number 1 in this stat, with a change per 100,000 of negative 312. Interesting, right? A week ago, they had 1,166 new cases, and now they have 337 new cases in that second week. Amarillo, Texas, North Wilkesboro, North Carolina, Pine Bluff, Arkansas, Sioux City, Iowa, Salisbury, Maryland are the top 5 on that list. New York City area, only 45th in the decreasing caseload. Deaths, similar story. I'll give you the top 5. Huntsville, Texas, Marshall, Texas, Reading, Pennsylvania, East Stroudsburg, Pennsylvania, and the Trenton, Princeton, New Jersey area. New York City area, 22nd on the list of where new deaths are decreasing most. Places on this list are not necessarily those where the outbreak is no longer severe, but sustained decreases in new cases and deaths are signs that a place is going in the right direction. The places hit hardest. Okay, I guess now we're getting to the critical thing. Below are the metro areas that have had the highest cumulative case and death rates since the start of the outbreak. That seems important too. What would you guess? The cumulative confirmed deaths, of course, you might guess, is the New York City area, and you'd be right there. What's second? Gallup, New Mexico. Again, our tragedy on the Navajo Nation's lands there. Albany, Georgia comes in 3rd. Fairfield County, Connecticut, 4th. And Trenton, Princeton, New Jersey, 5th. And I would have thought northern New Jersey would have come in ahead of that. But that's the cumulative confirmed deaths per 1,000. That's how it's being ranked. New York City area seeing, I guess that's where northern New Jersey got factored in there. I see. That's why Trenton, Princeton comes in at the top of the list for New Jersey. 1.92 deaths per 1,000. Almost 2 people out of every 1,000 dying in the New York area. That's pretty amazing. Gallup, New Mexico coming in second on the list there, 1.58. Over on cumulative confirmed cases, New York City area only comes in 4th by every 1,000 in population. The tops in confirmed cases cumulatively over the entirety of the pandemic, Marion, Ohio, where if they're not accidentally shooting themselves to death, they're catching coronavirus, I guess. 40.9 out, almost 41 out of every 1,000 residents has got coronavirus in the Marion, Ohio area. When was the last time you heard that mentioned? If it wasn't reading this article on your own. Gallup, New Mexico, again, illustrating the severity of the crisis among the Navajo. If I have that right, don't I? I mean, it's the right. I hope we haven't misidentified which native nation we're talking about here. Sioux City, Iowa, where the meatpacking plant outbreak has affected them. And I guess there, from all indications, the white residents of Sioux City, Iowa area, or the rest of Iowa, just think, well, it'll only happen to the Hispanic workers on the lines at the meatpacking plants. I don't know why you would think that when nearly 30 out of every 1,000 residents of the area has been affected. New York City comes in fourth on this one with a 24.31% rate. Number 5, Grand Island, Nebraska, which I think also was a meat packing plant. So it's been pretty amazing. And the pandemic is still out there, and people just, I guess, aren't interested. I mean, now they're distracted again for good reason. But it's awfully difficult to believe that people would put this behind them, considering what data is still out there. But I suppose, there are other things occupying their immediate attention. Brian Monroe tells us via Twitter that Huntsville, Texas, their problem is a prison where the bulk of the infections are located. And Huntsville is known for the high number of prisoner executions. Is that right? This pandemic appears to be expediting the process. Yeah, a grim humor there, but probably entirely true. All right. Let's see. Man, there's a number of other things. And I see some suggestions for some other directions to go into here, but boy, it's a very complicated day here. And we're, of course, running out of time as usual. We should just broadcast around the clock in order to catch up at some point. Let's see. You know what? Here's some other information that I alluded to the other day and didn't get around to reading, but will bring us back to the current protest environment. I remember seeing, I guess, when this was first when this was first floated, there was a reaction to Trump's earlier May 28th, 29th floating of the use of the Insurrection Act. And I mentioned, well, there are some legal problems with it, but there is really a construct within which we might be able to analyze it. I happened to see the tweets of Matthew Cortland, who describes himself as a policy communications strategy person and a health nerd and lawyer. So he's got one eye on coronavirus and one eye on the protest movement. Reacting, I guess, to some of the tweets from the president that were protested by other Twitter denizens as violating the terms of service on Twitter. And by the way, another interesting story there that I think I can just mention briefly. I don't know if I put it away or not, but I'll have to make a note. That somebody had the brilliant idea of opening a Twitter account that would do nothing but retweet verbatim what Trump was tweeting and see how long it took them for Twitter to ban them for inciting violence. And apparently it happened almost immediately, which is pretty amazing. And then I guess once his person's suspension is over, they'll come back and explain to everybody exactly what happened. But a brilliant experiment. And kudos to that person. I'll see if I can't dig that up. Matthew Cortland, though, saying, asking the question, if a foreign leader issued this threat to massacre civilians with military forces, of course, what would we think of this person? We know the answer to that. And he goes on, though, to say, so I guess we have to talk about 18 U.S. Code Section 1385, use of Army and Air Force as posse comitatus. And I guess he grabs a screen grab of that. Whoever, except in cases and under circumstances expressly authorized by the Constitution or Act of Congress, willfully uses any part of the Army or the Air Force as a posse comitatus or otherwise to execute the laws shall be fined under this title or imprisoned not more than 2 years or both. So I suppose that could be in the offing for a president if we were allowed to indict and arrest them. And I think we are, even though the memo says otherwise. But he goes on to say, when the National Guard is acting pursuant to the authority of a state's governor, they are exempt from the Posse Comitatus Act. For instance, Governor Tim Walz in Minnesota would be permitted to use his state's National Guard units for law enforcement. However, when the U.S. president federalizes the Guard, for example, under 10 U.S. Code Section 12406, those Guard elements become subject to the Posse Comitatus Act. The Posse Comitatus Act, originally signed into law in 1878, is designed to limit the power of presidents in these circumstances. Again, designed to limit the power of presidents. So, Trump federalizes the National Guard, as he's done in some cases here. What happens then? For example, or i.e., he says, what are the circumstances in which the Posse Comitatus Act doesn't apply? Because the text of the Posse Comitatus Act says, except in cases and under circumstances expressly authorized by the Constitution or Act of Congress. When has Congress expressly authorized the federalized National Guard unit to act in a law enforcement capacity? And the answer is the Insurrection Act of 1807. That's how far back you have to go to find the old Insurrection Act. And he goes on to discuss it here. This is a good piece on the Insurrection Act he offers up, written when Trump was contemplating using the military to round up immigrants. And it's a piece in the Atlantic. It'll be in the tweet thread, and you'll see it, and you can, maybe we'll read through it and maybe discuss it later in the week. Can't stop for it now. As a practical matter, in our current system of government, such as it is, Trump can likely deploy federal troops under the Insurrection Act. You're going to hear a lot of folks saying Trump cannot deploy federal troops because of the Posse Comitatus Act. The truth is those folks are wrong. The presidency has too much power, and it is held by one of the worst people alive. The thing is, if he does deploy federal troops, i.e. military takeover, it'll likely be under a claim that he is doing so to protect the civil rights of the people of Minneapolis, because that's explicitly, supposed to be anyway, the basis for such deployments under the Insurrection Act. There's a screen grab here that explains, from the Insurrection Act, the president, by using the militia or the armed forces, or both, or by any other means, shall take such measures as he considers necessary to suppress, in a state, any insurrection, domestic violence, unlawful combination, or conspiracy, if it, 1, so hinders the execution of the laws of that state, and of the United States within that state, that any part or class of its people is deprived of a right, privilege, immunity, or protection named in the Constitution and secured by law, and the constituted authorities of that state are unable, fail, or refuse to protect that right, privilege, or immunity, or to give that protection. Or, 2, opposes or obstructs the execution of the laws of the United States or impedes the course of justice under those laws. In any situation covered by Clause 1, the state shall be considered to have denied the equal protection of the laws secured by the Constitution. Interesting. And if you want more in the weeds, there's more, and I don't know what this is. Is this pointing us to a CRS report? Yes, a CRS report on the Posse Comitatus Act and related matters, the use of the military to execute civilian law. There's a guidelines for it. There's case law for it. And there's a statute that you're supposed to follow. But yes, that I think is therefore at the root of the effort by Trump and the White House to emphasize the act of an imagined organized force here. Why they keep insisting that Antifa, whatever it might be, is in fact some sort of organized force. That is what I guess they're pinning their hopes to, in order to, legally speaking, and constitutionally invoke the Insurrection Act. That Antifa is an organized force leading an insurrection that is a obvious and clear and immediate threat to the civil rights of the rest of the country because, of course, they are Antifa super soldiers and they intend to take away everybody's guns and Bibles or something to that effect and therefore take over the United States. That is that's the insurrection they have in mind when they talk about suppressing it with the use of the military. And I guess, not surprising, just before I came on the show, I happened to see on Twitter, and I think it's still open on my phone here, the tweet from Matt Ortega, I guess that's also supposed to help fuel this, pointing out this lie is literally the kind of stuff, not use the real word here, that Nazis pulled post-Reichstag fire to foist blame on their rivals, the communists. It's the captured tweet of somebody tweeting under the name of Verita Nurse. Not much Veritas in this one. Pray for us, she says. Police just warned us 6,000 rioters and looters are coming by bus, because rioters use buses all the time. They're coming where? Here to Notre Dame, Indiana, where I live. Who says I live in Notre Dame, Indiana?
From Daily Kos Radio on networksradio.com. You have been listening to the Kagro in the Morning Show
with David Waldman.
Pretty amazing. Obviously, they might mean South Bend, but it sounds like it's a stupid bot or Russian writing this one. They said to be inside by 9 and lock all our doors. We're going to protect ourselves. Pray for us. Don't forget. Well, of course, the buses of 6,000 looters never showed up. What a surprise. Got to hand you off to Justice next.